Hey everybody, Wayne Dorband here from Denver International Airport. Actually, we'll show you that it's actually hardly anybody here. Not quite figuring this out. Usually at 7 or this time of the night, you know what I think it is? I think people are just now coming to take the flights that go later. The gate I go out of, there's 3 flights, it looks like, after my flight. No, 2 flights after my flight to go out. My gate's right across from where I'm at. And this is the highlight of my day, to do this with you folks. I mean that. I'm not just saying it. And we are going to a new topic tonight. We're going to be talking about shrimp aquaculture, and very different than the first series that I did that was right before the ecological aquaculture that we finished. That one was called backyard aquaculture, and it was really focused at anybody that wanted to do something with aquaculture, fish farming, but aquaculture in their backyards, their decks, their garages, their neighbor's lawn. And I taught for a number of weeks. By the way, we're making a course out of that. And those of you that are in the Elite Eat team, you don't have to worry about it because you already have it. You can go back and listen to all those webinars and watch them anytime you want. But you're also going to get the course for free. But we'll be selling that course as a one-off course. We'll have several different kinds of prices for it. I'm not going to go into that detail now, but that'll be available probably, Mark, when do you think? Mark's been the one really helping me through it. Pretty close, isn't it, Mark? Within a week or so, I would guess.
Yeah, probably next week, very early next week.
Yep, we'll be ready with it. So, but that's not what this is about. That was backyard aquaculture. This is commercial. Everybody that's here, you guys are welcome to stay and learn all you want to learn, but please don't ask me, and if you do, I mean, you can go ahead and ask. There's no dumb question, but if you ask me the question, can I grow shrimp in an aquarium in my backyard? Yeah, but I don't know why, unless you just want to look at them. You're not going to grow them to do any personal. You can't grow, what it takes to grow a few shrimp is not a whole lot different than what it takes to grow a lot of shrimp in a aquaculture system of the type I'm going to talk about. If you're in Southeast Asia and you just want to dig a pond and you want to go grab some shrimp somewhere and put them in that big pond and then bring a net back in 3 or 4 months later to harvest them, that's not the kind of farming that we're going to be talking about. I've not done that kind of farming, and I'm not going to ever teach about something that I haven't done. And by the way, that is the primary kind of shrimp farming in the world. And we're going to talk about that tonight. That's what we're going to do in terms of our introduction here. But this is going to be a course about how you can make some money, commercial shrimp farming, shrimp aquaculture. Now, I will also say this as a front-end disclaimer. You could, and I don't know how many weeks this is going to go. I'm guessing 13 to 15 weeks probably. And actually, it's going to take some breaks. We're going to have some guest presenters that'll do Monday night sessions on weeks that I'm going to take a break. But essentially for 13 to 15 weeks or so, I'll give you a lot of information, very detailed information in some cases. But if you think you can take this 13 to 15 weeks and go out and commercially grow shrimp without any more education, I think you're going to fail. I've been learning about shrimp farming for almost 50 years, I hate to admit it, but about 45 years. I learned something new. I did a whole bunch of research for this tonight, and I learned at least 10 new things that I didn't know previously that are going to be helpful for me as I help the next person, as I help you guys tonight. But I had 2 emails today, one from Africa and one from South America, that both said, I want you to teach me everything I need to know to make a lot of money growing shrimp. I can do that, but not in this little series. And it's going to take one-on-one consulting. It's going to take visits to your farm or your farm location, it's going to be a lot more than what you're going to get in this course. Now, you're going to get a lot of great info, and it's going to help you hopefully decide really whether shrimp farming is something that you should think about doing. And it'll give you a great base to be able to go further. Go find yourself another instructor, another coach, someone else to help you, or hopefully you'll see enough value in what you might learn from us, and maybe you'd like to continue to work with us. I have been growing shrimp commercially on and off, not for all the years, but since 1973, when I was a new graduate student at Scrimp's Institute of Oceanography and working on specifically a lobster project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit later why lobster aren't shrimp, but a lobster aquaculture project. And a graduate student that had just finished before I started, Steve Surfling, had a facility about 3 miles from our lab at Scrimp's Institute of Oceanography. I'll show a picture of Scripps at some point. Now, shoot, I might as well show it now. That'd be kind of fun. Get you guys to see what Scripps looks like, because it's pretty cool, and it'll give you a little bit more sense of me and why I could teach on this topic. So we're going to go to just a search here, Scripps. It's a little diversion from what I plan to do, but I'll show you exactly where my lab was. So this is the Scripps Pier viewed from a drone or an overhead. Come on, picture right there. And as you can see, the end of it is out beyond the surf line. And Scripps actually has marine ships that hundreds of people will go on. They will actually dock here at times. You rarely see them. And they could be boarded off of the dock. But right down here, I don't know whether I can blow this up or not, right at the end of the pier, literally right there, is what, before I got there in 1973, this probably a change occurred not too far before I did, 1970 maybe, was some seawater tanks. So when the seawater that's used at all of this facility, all of what I'm circling with my cursor here, is the Scripps Institute of Oceanography campus. And when I was there, everything this way did not exist. And everything this way was pretty much like it is today. Actually, this is a newer building right here, which is actually a tourist center and a restaurant. But all the rest of these buildings were here. This building was here. Anyway, the way they would get seawater then, they do it differently today, is they'd pump it. They had a pipe that went down here at the end of the pier. They would grab it from right underneath here. They pumped it up a trough that goes right along the edge of the pier here. And then they would put it into these holding containers that my lab ended up being in. And they'd pump it up to a water tank that's up on the hill up above here, about right where my cursor is up here. And then they gravity feed it down to all of these laboratories that are down here. Well, at some point, not too long before I got there, they decided they didn't need these tanks to settle out the sand. And maybe they had a new pump and they were able to get rid of the sand out at the end. I never did figure that one out. But we turned these two essentially holes in the ground into labs. And that's where we were doing lobster aquaculture. We also had a facility at a power plant about 30 miles north of here in Carlsbad. But back to the story. Steve Surfling, whose house was about 2 miles this direction in Solana Beach, was doing shrimp aquaculture. He was starting to do it, and all of us that were grad students got to work with him. And so I would 3 or 4 times a week go up to Steve's place, work with an entrepreneur, truly a guy that's mind-blowing, quite honestly. He's that good. And this is the view back from the end of the pier, back down to the lab again. I was hoping there'd be one. Oh, here we go. Our lab was right, now that's the pier. Nope, that's not where it is. I would have thought there'd be a picture right from the end of the pier. This is right, that's that building that I was showing you that's right next to the pier. This is taken off of the pier, looking at the building. Blow this picture up. So my lab was just on the other side of where this picture's being taken from. So anyway, I started working with shrimp then. I worked for another 3 years during that time frame. I took a break from it when I went to grad school. I went to another PhD program. There's the pier, by the way, from an angle. So our lab was just right. This is taken from somewhere on the Scripps campus. By the way, this is one of the most beautiful places on the planet, which I'm flying to this area tonight. I'm not going to get to go to the pier probably while I'm there, but almost every trip I make there, I do go there. I'm not going to do it this trip. But I worked then, and then starting about 10 years ago, I've done different kinds of things through the years in between, but starting 10 years ago, we started growing shrimp commercially inland in northern Colorado. And through the course, I'll show you multiple pictures of our facility, of our tanks, of our greenhouses, through all the sorts of things that we did, harvest that we did, stocking that we did, all of it. We got lots of videos and stills and everything else. And I'm not sure there aren't very many more other people that have done much more with this kind of shrimp culture than I have through the years. So that's a little bit of the background of why I have some credibility to do this. I've been a doer, and I strongly believe this is a kind of aquaculture that we're going to see much, much more of, because the way that shrimp are grown now, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, is just not right. It's just destroying the planet with the way that shrimp are being grown in the Asian, Southeast Asia. So again, this is sort of the introduction that I've been doing right now. Just a couple of things about the overall EAT program. We're in the 7th week of our now Eat Free program. We're about to have more Eat Free members than we do Elite members. So we're getting close to passing 2,500 Eat Free members. And with William's seminar tomorrow on permaculture, permaculture apprentice, he's already got like 800 registered, and I'll be making those people members either before then or after then. We're going to be way over 3,000 members for our Eat Free community. Oops, I went ahead, didn't mean to do that. We had another really successful webinar last week with the Sustainable Design Masterclass. I just had a call with Raleigh a little bit earlier today. We're going to much more formally be partnering with them. It's going to be really cool because we're going to be getting their people who are doing mainly just one webinar. They just do a one-time presentation, and we're going to probably be getting a bunch of them to come in and be series coaches for us. So that relationship is going to get stronger and stronger. Tonight, right after this, about 15 minutes when we're done after this, we're going to have our 6th week of weekly announcements, Q&A, and networking, mainly Q&A and networking. Tonight, I will only be on by phone because I'm going to be on a plane. For the second half, I'll only be on for just a little bit of that. And then I already talked about William. And then we're starting next week. I think it'll become a series, but right now it's a one guest webinar from Hugh Goebel. He's a member of our community. Let's see if Hugh's out there tonight. I'm going to look real quick. Mark, do you see Hugh in our audience at all tonight? Well, my phone's trying to talk to me. I don't see Hugh, so he's not there with us. It's actually probably much later there in the middle of the night for him. He's in South Africa, and he's going to do a one-time session about financial and business planning, but he's got a whole series that's prepared for us. So if we like him and he likes us, he'll continue to do that, and he'll alternate if it works out with William. So we'll go every other week. William will do 1 week, Hugh will do 1 week, William, Hugh, and so on. And those are already up there. You can register for Hugh's webinar. It's already there and available for you to register for. Actually, I'll have to send out an announcement. It hasn't been put on your announcements yet, so I'll send that to you. So we're going to do an introduction. I already started a little bit of that. Hopefully I'll get through shrimp as an organism, what they are. We'll go through a little bit of the history of a shrimp fishery and shrimp farming, and talk about the current status, which I gave you a little glimpse of. And depending on how far I get today, I think I'll probably won't finish all this, but I'll try to next week get into super intensive aquaculture and really about shrimp as livestock. So it's a good point to look at the questions, see if you've got any questions for me. So if you do, you can throw them in. Hey, Thomas, in Germany. Eric, thank you. And those guys are great. I don't know who those guys were. I've talked about a variety of different guys there. But by the way, I had an amazing time. I do want to say this at Acres USA last week. If you guys can come, next week it's going to be in next year it's going to be in Columbus, Ohio. Acres USA, by the way, is farmers. I don't know that you'll go to a presentation or conference, and it's relatively inexpensive, by the way, compared to some, where you'll have a higher percentage of farmers. And that's all different ranges of farmers, little farmers, big farmers, farmers in transition. And I met a whole bunch of new people. I re-networked with the people I knew already, and we're going to have a whole bunch of them that are going to be doing sessions for us. Gabe Brown, if you've heard of that name, up in North Dakota, is going to be doing sessions with us. Will Williams, I'm not remembering his last name. He's a grazing guy. He is off the charts good. There's going to be 10 or 15 that we'll get doing webinars for us. It's going to be awesome. So I don't see any other questions right now. Throw them in there. The sustainable design guys. Yep, they're awesome. So that's Raleigh and Neil and all of their guests. And this week, I think we've got a small farmer that we're going to be doing they're going to do on Thursday for that. So that's on the schedule. All right, so real quick, I'll just go through sort of what is this economic action team as we're talking about it real quick. I want to make one announcement to all of you. I think you're the first ones hearing it live. You've got announcements for this if you're in the Elite Eat team, but if you're in the Eat Free, you did get these announcements, but you're going to hear more about this. But for all those in the Elite Eat, you can now go out and make money by bringing new people into Eat. And the affiliate fees are awesome. You can make 50% of what the people pay. There's some of you that'll make a living doing it, quite honestly, if you try to work at it a little bit. Just to give you a sense of what happened today, we had 8 people who signed up to be affiliates by about 2 hours ago. I haven't looked in the last couple of hours. And as of that time, they had gotten 780 people to come to our site, to the site to check it out. And we had, I don't know, way over 100 new Eat Free members. And so, again, this is resonating with some people out there today. And there's going to be amazing teaching going on from a lot of folks moving ahead. Hi, Pollock from India. Nice to see you. You're here to learn about shrimp aquaculture. That's what you're going to hear about, but it's not going to come tonight. You're going to hear about, you better be committed to be here for the next 13 to 15 weeks or longer. If you expect you're going to learn everything you need to know to grow fish tonight, that ain't happening. So this is something that's going to take some time, because I don't think anybody who thinks they can learn about any kind of aquaculture in an hour, frankly, we're not the right people to be talking to about that, because that's not what we can do. If there's somebody that can teach you in an hour, go find them. It certainly isn't me. So, again, what's next, depending on how far we get tonight, we're going to go and move on from there starting next week. So what we're going to start talking about first is, what are shrimp? So I'm going to actually start with a Wikipedia article that I brought up. And got some, I'm not going to use much of it. It's just there's some neat pictures here that I want you to see. And here's a pretty cool picture of a shrimp. And I'm going to just go through these a little bit. This happens to be one who's hiding under a rock. The name shrimp, by the way, was coined in English initially about a smaller form of a decapod, and shrimp are decapods, which means they have 10 what we would call legs. I'm going to show you a very specific picture of what that means in a minute. And here you're seeing some of them. They have 10 on each side, and that also includes their antennae and their what a lot of people call pincers in the front. And they started calling them shrimp in contrast to lobsters and crabs, who were much larger. So they thought these things must be real similar, but they're littler, so we're going to call them shrimp. The largest of shrimp is actually freshwater, and it's called a prawn, and we'll talk about what the difference between shrimp and prawns are in just a minute. And that one is found in tropical areas in freshwater, and they can get to be up to a foot or so in size and length, but most shrimp are probably 6 inches or so or shorter. It's hard to tell how big these are, but they're probably in that size range. I'm going to see by clicking through. All right, so here's more of a picture of a shrimp. I actually have another picture where it's going to give us some more of the characteristics, but I do want to talk about them. So if you count their appendages, this is showing, actually it's hard because it's actually showing some, I think, on both sides. Let's go ahead here a little bit. Before I do that, I want to point out that one of the real important features of a shrimp, and it's really important as you think about shrimps from an aquaculture perspective, is that they have what's called an exoskeleton. And that's this hard material that's on the external of their body. And that's also called a carapace at times, and I think you'll see that on a future slide here. But that exoskeleton is identical in its purpose as our endoskeletons are, our bones internally. So this is their bones. This is their skeletal structure. And what's different from mammals or organisms with endoskeletons is they actually shed this shell, this exoskeleton, this carapace, to grow. So I have a business call I was on earlier today that I'm not great at making jokes while I'm doing a presentation, but I'm going to try one. It's not really a joke, but something that's a little bit funny. Is this guy was talking about, a little bit tough place in his life. He said, well, but I heard a story one time. He said, life is like lobsters. And if you want to be like a good lobster, but let's say life is like a shrimp. It says, a lot of times in your life, you're uncomfortable. And if you just crawl back up under a rock and shed your shell, which is a tough shell, you'll overnight grow another one, and then you'll get more comfortable again, and you'll grow into that, and then you're going to get uncomfortable again. It's sort of like life. Well, that's the way that shrimp grow. They have these exoskeletons. They shed them. It's called metamorphosis. And when they get rid of that shell, very quickly, literally, the new shell is already beginning to grow. It's soft inside, and within hours, it completely hardens up. And it has to protect them. So in the wild, shrimp will seek shelter when they know they're going to go through that process. That process is called molting. And they will molt, they'll lose one shell, and they'll grow another one, and they'll get a lot larger every time that happens until they really literally reach the point that they're going to die. And it's after they reproduce, typically. And when they reach that point, they don't grow another shell, and that's what we would call dying of old age if they haven't been hit by some other disease. This, by the way, is a lobster. And there's some really subtle distinctions, but one of the big ones is that lobsters and crabs, which I think the next picture is going to be of, are also decapods. They have the same number of appendages, but they are crawlers rather than swimmers. That is the typical description of what defines a shrimp or a prawn, which is that they're, and it's primarily in their rear ends, they have very, very strong rear ends of their body, and they use those rear ends, they compress them to swim, and they swim backwards. So they go like this, and their direction would be this way. Lobsters can do that also, by the way, but they don't have nearly as strong, and they primarily move by crawling. Crabs, which I think the next one, this is just another lobster, a little smaller version of one. There's a crab. So crab, also a decapod, and you're only seeing 4 here. They would have 5 actually, but they'd have some smaller ones underneath that they use to crawl with, and but they're very, very closely related, but they're in different families, and these are crawlers, and they'll get a lot bigger. Crabs will get, some of them 3 feet in size, giant crabs. Lobsters will get 2 to 3 feet in size. So here's where I wanted to get to. This is sort of describing a shrimp for you and describing its body parts. So now we're going to count. Here's one of the things that, again, are distinctive that give them this, all this strength in the back end of their bodies, which are these swimmerettes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, which is the chela, the front one. So they have 4 periopods, they have 5 swimmerettes, pleopods, and 1 chela. The chelas are used to move food into their mouths, and their mouths are right up here. And then these antennae, which are all important, they're not considered one of the 10 legs, pods, and neither are these scaphrocereites on the front, which are essentially the jaws. That's where food would come in. They can also use their periopods to move food, and they'll actually sit in the water and move their swimmerettes rapidly and move food towards the chela and even directly into their mouths. From this portion back, it's called the abdomen, and that's where you'll find most of the digestive tract. And this portion up under the carapace here is where you'll find their heart, their gills, their what we would call equivalent to our liver, which they have what's called a Hepato Pancreas, which is very large. And anybody who's ever sucked the head of a crayfish or a shrimp, that's what you've gotten, is that Hepato Pancreas that has melted and it's turned into a fluid, and that's what you're getting as you eat it. So continue to move. And actually, I'm going to go back. I don't want to show all these. I want to show you a few more pictures in the wild here of what some shrimps would look like. These are much smaller ones. This is a freshwater shrimp, actually. And these are in shallow waters, as you can see. They do use their walking legs sometimes to perch, but they'll swim a lot also. That one. Here's ones that can actually camouflage themselves to look as if they're a decaying part of a leaf. There are over 3,000 species of shrimp, and yet only 2 that are primarily raised in aquaculture systems. And we'll talk about those 2 species in detail. Another one, again, very colorful. Some of those that are present in the wild. These are very small. So this one, which it says live in deep and dark waters, and the color is there so they can identify each other. Let's go away from that again. This is a picture you probably, some of you have probably even seen on our Mark, does this picture ring a bell to you? This is one that you've probably seen on our several articles we've written about how you can farm shrimp, right, Mark? Freshwater shrimp farming and so on. And this is actually a marine shrimp, and this is sitting on top of a sea cucumber. Let's blow this picture up so you can see it. So that shrimp is on top of the marine cucumber. So just to talk a little bit about their taxonomy, which means what groups of organisms they're in. They're broadly in a large group called decapods, and then there's what we call suborders, which make up the Dimiobrachiata and the Pleostomata. And then really there's two groups, the Charididae and the Procharididae. And then finally, the Dimiobrachiata do not have a smaller order, and then they go on to the kinds of species that are there. This is where the two species that we primarily use in aquaculture are in. These smaller groups are not farmed. They are fished, however. So these are just some other types of crustaceans. You can see some history. Let's click on this. This is commercial production of shrimp. I will point this out, so it's a good point to say it. But here's wild capture. Wild capture of shrimp, this is through 2010, has greatly leveled off. And even if you were to go through 2015, it's declined. We have almost completely destroyed the wild populations of shrimp. And so by far now, the largest amount of shrimp that are produced are in aquaculture systems. And that, in 2010, aquaculture systems passed wild capture. And this is up at 7 billion pounds here, up above here. And it's actually closer to 12 billion pounds today. So we'll talk more about that in just a little bit. So why don't I stop here, because I'm not going to spend a lot more time about shrimp themselves, and then I am going to talk about fishing and farming a little bit through our introduction. So let me see if you have any other questions. I do. I'm going to ask Palak a question from India. Palak, are you still there? And are you getting anything out of this? Is this what you were hoping to get? Are you learning a little bit about shrimp? I don't see him answer. So, any other questions about shrimp themselves before we talk about our next topic, which is going to be about, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between crayfish and shrimp and prawns. But and shrimp really does mean small. That's where the name came from when it was developed. And Palak says, yeah, that's very interesting. Good. Thank you, Palak. Appreciate that. All right. So let's talk about crayfish for a second. And I think I brought up a page here that I can show you. It might be this one. About crayfish. Crayfish are in the lobster family, actually. So they're crawlers. Now, they will swim some, and they're all over the world. Matter of fact, most of what are called freshwater prawns in Australia and New Zealand are actually crayfish. Most common crayfish in the United States is Procamberus clarkii. I'm going to click on that in a minute, and it will show us the site, but I'm going to wait for just a second. And we're not going to be talking about crayfish here for one really simple reason. If it's happened, I'd be shocked. I don't believe, by the way, Wikipedia is trying to get everybody to donate at the end of the year here. You don't normally see this on a wiki page, but to my knowledge, no one has figured out how to culture crayfish in intense, dense culture systems, which is what we're going to talk about in the world, because like lobsters, and nobody's cultured lobsters either, by the way, and that's what I was working on 40 years ago. We were unsuccessful in getting lobster aquaculture going. And the reason is because crayfish, like lobsters and not like shrimp, have large clia. And I'm going to move this over. I'm going to click on a picture. I hope there's a picture of a crayfish here. Well, I'm going to go to Rosenberg here. Procambus. So this is going to be the American crayfish. This is what you find in most places throughout the U.S. Here's a picture of it. Let's look at this one. And the big difference, lobsters are going to be the same, crabs are going to be the same. These big claws. These suckers will eat each other. They're highly cannibalistic. Shrimp, on the other hand, particularly the two species that we will grow in shrimp aquaculture systems, will only get cannibalistic if they're forced into it by being in very dense population areas. So it's rare that they will actually get cannibalistic. So let's see what the next picture here of the crayfish here. Rosenberg. Here's a picture from the top. So this is the crayfish we have where I live, and this is probably about 3 or 4 inches long. And if you start to put these into a culture system, frankly, you start to put them in anything very dense, and they're going to just eat each other. So it goes back a little bit to our ecological aquaculture. I am growing crayfish, and I am culturing them, I believe, but I'm not trying to do it in anything very super intense. And all I'm trying to do is make sure that I maintain a population density that's very close to being natural in a system, in an ecological aquaculture system. That's not what we're going to really be talking about during this series. This is going to be much more super intensive. Here's a broil. So these are crayfish, crawdads that have been boiled. By the way, you can do the same thing with shrimp, lobster, others. But this is just an example of a crayfish boil. All right, so let's go back to our slide here. So there's sort of our crayfish shrimp. Probably not. They're really probably, actually, in terms of what this taxonomy question I was telling you about a little bit earlier, it's really questionable. There's different frames of thought, even amongst experts, about what is a shrimp sometimes and what is a lobster. What is a crab? They're all decapods. It gets to be a little bit of semantics. Most importantly for us, though, we're going to really be talking about 2 species. I'm going to show you pictures of those in a second. And that's the Pacific white shrimp and the tiger shrimp, sometimes called the giant tiger shrimp. And they're very similar. And actually, the way that they look, they'll grow to be approximately 6 inches or so in length. And you can typically have about 16 of them per pound, so they're about a 1/16 of a pound in weight when they reach their maximum size, and that's what we're going to be dealing with primarily here. All right, why do we care about shrimp? Well, let's first talk about them in the wild. They are a very, very important food source for larger marine animals, for whales, for fish of all different kinds. And it's one of the reasons why we should care about the wild stock, which has been hugely overfished. There is still fishing going on. There's not a lot of control in international waters. And there's a lot of people who feel that we may have pushed shrimp into a very endangered status, particularly those 2 species, which are the primarily eaten species in the world, Pacific marine white and giant tiger shrimp. And I'll talk more about those in just a second. But we need to be concerned about them. And the other reason we care about them is they are the second most eaten form of aquatic organisms, aquatic animals, in the world. Seaweed is actually third. Sometimes it's talked about as being second. And first, I've talked about this before. Usually I'm a guy who likes to ask questions, and I know some of you would get this right. Our carp, common carp. Fourth is actually herring, which is a small fish. It's also under a lot of distress from natural fishing. So if we're going to continue to eat more and more shrimp, which we are, shrimp consumption is going up dramatically. That graph I showed you earlier showed a graph of that. And I'm going to actually go to shrimp farming here, shrimp fishery first. Here is a chart of shrimp fishery in the world. And giant tiger prawns are up here at the top. Southern rough shrimp is here, very similar to, these are fisheries. This is not aquaculture. And then northern prawns are here. These are all marine, by the way. And then this is what the Pancreas shrimp, which is now what are the most cultured in aquaculture. And then a bunch of others, a little less important species because we just don't eat them here in the U.S., but they are consumed throughout the rest of the world. And notice that the total amount here is about 3.5 million in 2010 tons. And remember, aquaculture has passed this now. It's more fish that are produced in aquaculture system than there are that are caught. Here's a good picture of this is a cold water shrimp. So cold water shrimp are what are still being fished in a big way up in the northern hemisphere, Norway, Iceland, Sweden, Finland, and those. Much, much smaller. This is probably only 2.5, 3 inches in length rather than 6 inches or so. And this is a very important species, also threatened in terms of its culture that's going on. Okay. Now we're going to go to shrimp aquaculture a little bit. So again, 2 primary species. Go to both of them. Pancreas banami, which is Pacific marine white shrimp. Right when I need it to work fast, it's working slow. This is what I've had the most experience with, although I've also grown tiger shrimp. Doesn't look like there's a lot of pictures here, but this is going to be a good one, I'm sure. By the way, I've told this to some of you in other times. When you see a shrimp that's all orange throughout its body in the store, don't buy it. That shrimp was harvested dead. A shrimp harvested alive, like this one was, these are dead, obviously, should be brown or gray in color, and they should stay that way even as they're frozen. So even when you get them in a food counter, they came from China or Vietnam or Cambodia, and they're orange, they harvested that dead. So they took a net through a pond, and they pulled up shrimp which had been dead for who knows how long. This is a great picture, by the way, of molt. So this is the exoskeleton that has molted off of a shrimp, different pieces of it. And that, by the way, there's a lot of really great elements that I'll talk about for the characteristics of that exoskeleton containing a material called chitin that we'll talk about in a future session. And then we're going to go backwards and go to tiger shrimp. Here it is, Pancreas monodon. And honestly, I would challenge you, unless you really knew what you were looking at, to know the difference. You saw them in the wild. Very difficult to tell the difference between them. And this is becoming the largest species that is grown in Australia now, and also, and you can see in the caption down here, and it's growing in Asia. They'll actually get a little larger than Pacific marine white shrimp. So here you can see they'll get to be 25 to 30 centimeters, so 10 to 12 inches in size when they get very big, females. Males don't get quite as big, they're 8 to 10 inches, and most of them are between 100 and 170 grams. Again, bigger than Pacific marine white shrimp. So let me see what questions we have. And I'm going to be pretty disciplined to stop tonight right at the top of the hour. Do you guys have any other questions right now? Throw them in if you've got them about 3 topics, really, or anything related to shrimp culture. Many of them I'm going to probably tell you we're going to learn about that later, but another sessions. Next week we're going to go very much into the very specific sort of overview of what way we do what's called super intensive culture. But any questions about shrimp in general, what kinds of organisms they are, shrimp fishery, I'm going to go back and talk about that a little bit more here just to finish, and then broadly sort of what is involved, what kinds of shrimp are involved in shrimp aquaculture. Okay, not seeing any questions. We're going to go back to the fishery for just a second. I'm going to talk about some of the other problems with shrimp fisheries. This, by the way, is a trawler, which is what's commonly used. They have big outriggers, and they trawl through the water, and they put that net down near the bottom, and they just grab the shrimp that are swimming near the bottom. Used to be very common in the Gulf of Mexico. That fishery is just about gone. What's left are very small compared to what it used to be. Here's a shrimper on the coast of the U.S., which you can still do some northern shrimping, and they'll do it by hand, and they do it in estuaries, and they're looking for shrimp that are still not quite mature in size. I'm just going to go. I want to show one more thing about the fisheries. I talked about it briefly, but I want to finish with this. But one of the big problems of shrimp fisheries, so using those trawlers and such, is called bycatch. So bycatch is anything other than shrimp that you're catching, that you're killing. And it is a real problem, especially with turtles. And there are at least 10 species of turtles that are now considered endangered or maybe even extinct because of the incidental catch. That's what bycatch is also called. That means catching non-target species. So this is typically, and here's how horrible the numbers are. In 1997, the Food and Agriculture Organization worldwide found that there was discard rates of 20 pounds. This is one of the things I learned today. I told you I learned 10 things. 20 pounds of bycatch for every pound of catch that was caught. That's horrible, by the way. History-wise, shrimp have been used as food for as long as we have history, written history. 600 AD, there's writing of fishing off the coast of North America by Native Americans. There's all the way back to biblical scrolls. There's pictures of what probably look to be some kind of a shrimp or lobster, kind of a decapod-ish animal. So it's been a long time. In the U.S., we sort of fell in love with them starting way back during the gold rush time frames, which is what this paragraph talks about. And Americans have loved shrimp as a high-end food for a long time. So let me see if I've got any other questions. Come on, don't be shy, everybody. Ask some questions. Yeah, great question, Mark. Aside from shrimp meat, are there other byproducts? Absolutely, the carapace. And unfortunately, in the way that the Southeast Asians farm, they just throw them away. But that exoskeleton has huge byproduct value. Chitin is one of the most unique, special forms of a natural structure in the world. We have not yet been able to synthesize anything that has strength, buoyancy, fireproofing, any number of other characteristics. So yeah, it's an amazing product that we really should do much more with. And as Americans have begun to do more shrimp culture, we're going to talk about that. That's a byproduct. Actually, the veins. So you've probably heard about deveined shrimp. A deveined shrimp is a shrimp that's been not just had its blood vessels taken out, but it's had all its guts taken out of it. And the guts and the blood, those byproducts are also excellent byproducts. They can be made into pet food, a bunch of really excellent characteristics. And then finally, there is some value to the eye stalks, which is really interesting, that are being used for some medicinal purposes. Obviously not a whole lot there, but that's another thing. So those are all byproducts. That's correct, Eric. Shrimp are not kosher. And you bring up a good point. There are several different religions in the world who would not consume shrimp. And there's even a form of the Muslim religion in which shrimp are not considered to be a form of an organism that should be consumed. So you are correct. So I don't want to get started on my next topic just because it's longer. It's at least a 20, 30 minute, maybe more than that, which is to talk about the systems themselves. So we might stop a little early unless you guys have got a few other questions. Like I'm open. Just throw them at me if you got them. Shrimp are mostly, by the way, eaten frozen or fresh today. There's not nearly as much canning as there used to be in the past. The Chinese have become huge consumers of shrimp, by the way, and probably consume more shrimp today than are consumed in the U.S. One of the reasons that shrimp are important is they're still considered very high value. And in the U.S., there's so little, only 12% of the shrimp eaten in the United States come from offshore fisheries, and less than 1% comes from aquaculture of shrimp in the United States. And which means there's a large niche opportunity with shrimp, which is why so many people have such interest in it. By the way, in India, same circumstance. Huge potential market, high end. Shrimp are not going to be a species that will feed the masses. I will say that. So Pythok has a question. The dead shrimp, which are orange from the bottom, as you mentioned, are of any other use? Well, people eat them, and they're not necessarily bad. The problem is when they're coming from someplace you just don't know how long they've been dead. There's a lot of disease issues in South Asian and South American culture, and so you have no idea what you might be getting disease-wise. That could even be a problem for you. You have no idea how they've been taken care of, and you have no idea how long they've been dead. If you properly cook them, you should be able to deal with a lot of those things. They are not going to taste as good as a fresh shrimp. I guarantee you a shrimp that we grow in an aquaculture system, it almost melts in your mouth. It's so soft and fresh. But absolutely, if they're properly cared for, you can eat them. But I wouldn't, I'm just telling you because most people actually have sort of a myth that orange is the color that they should be. They'll turn orange as soon as you start to cook them. They get warm, they'll turn orange. That's the reason they turned orange when they died. They got warm. And that's the reason the color is that. So any other questions before we stop here tonight? Throw some ones in if you got some value out of this. Next time we're going to talk about specifically the kind of intense aquaculture that is being used here in the U.S. and also in Europe. And I've been helping people put systems in the Middle East and in Africa and in other parts of the world. So Stuart asked a question. Would North American shrimp qualify higher than Asian? Would they command? Oh, absolutely, they would in the U.S. Locally produced seafood of any kind is going to be a higher price, no question. And I'm talking about maybe 50% higher in some cases. A little glimpse, though, is you don't need to have that much higher price because if you grow shrimp properly, the margins can be excellent even at the price that you would find that you would be competing with for shrimp that are being imported. But they will command a higher price. What two species you said are grown commercially? Tiger shrimp and Pacific marine white shrimp. The scientific name is Leptopenaeus vanami. Pacific marine white shrimp. All right, so I actually do have the top of the hour, and they're actually looking to board my plane, which unbelievably got in a lot earlier than it normally does. So I'm going to stop the recording. Not seeing any other questions.